Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello and welcome to Madison's Notes, the official podcast of Princeton University's James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. I'm your host, Laura Laurent, and today we have Dr. Jason Blakely, an associate professor of political science at Pepperdine University in California. He is the author of Lost in Ideology, Interpreting Modern Political Life. He is considered a leading scholar of contemporary communitarian and post-liberal thought, particularly the works of Alistair MacIntyre and Charles Taylor, a writer whose books and essays often straddle deep divides of left and right, religious and secular, academic and popular. He also regularly contributes to Harper's Magazine and The Atlantic. Today we'll be mostly talking about his book, Lost in Ideology, Interpreting Modern Political Life, and diving into the various conundrums presented to us in this modern day when we are surrounded by political ideologies. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, Dr. Blakely. Thank you so much for coming onto Madison's Notes. I am really excited to get into this book and your thought work. I usually organize my questions beforehand and narrow down the few that I want. And for this particular episode, I have maybe 3 pages of questions that all felt like they were necessary to ask. So regardless of where we go, it'll be wonderful. But just to start for our listeners, I've read your book, Lost in Ideology, a really wonderful piece of work. However, I want to give it its best shot for the short amount of time that we have. So can you give us a brief introduction to the arguments that you're presenting here? Because some of them are kind of a hard pill to swallow, and I want to hear how you would elevator pitch it for us.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, and it's an honor to be here. I'm gratified by the invitation. Yeah, I guess it is sort of a hard pill to swallow. I mean, one way into it that's sort of easy is just to tell a little story, which is, so I once had a family member who he was an English speaker and he traveled to a Spanish-speaking country in the Caribbean. And he, very cheerful by disposition. He was getting older in years. And every time he'd walk up to someone, he would just start speaking in English to them, even though they were Spanish speakers. And he really wanted to connect, and he was doing it in a cheerful way. I sort of felt badly for him, but it was going nowhere. The taxi driver, the waiter, et cetera, always just English, and almost expecting an answer out of habit. And by the end of the trip, he was sort of burned out on the country and never really connected, and sort of felt grumpy about the whole thing. And I actually think we're all like this family member of mine, because I think in ideological age, we all walk up to the other person and start speaking our ideological language as though it's a natural language that everyone spontaneously understands. And so at the center of the book is this idea that part of why ideological debate has become so frustrating, angry, confused, tumultuous in the United States is because people go up and start saying buzzwords to each other from their own ideological language and expect it to translate over, like freedom, liberty, equality, but they actually mean different things in their ideological languages, or a big one, gender, which I could give an example of if that's helpful in a moment.
Yeah. How did we get here? How did we come to an age? I mean, you've described this ideological age as something that we're encountering now and started maybe in the Enlightenment, but can you give us a little bit more detail as to what existed before the age of ideology?
Yeah, so I think of ideologies as particular to the modern period, and that's because I think of them, I'm following here a very famous, actually Princeton-based anthropologist who died a number of decades ago, Clifford Geertz, and his idea that ideologies are maps, right? They're maps of meaning that help orient you within a terrain. And I basically adopt Geertz's view of ideology, but I add to it that if they're maps, they're strange maps because they also make the world. They're not just maps that map a terrain out there. They make the terrain. When we have an ideology, we try to make society in its image. We try to build institutions, practices, and so on. Now, why haven't people always had maps? You might say, well, people have always had maps, to your question. Why is this a specifically ideological age? Well, I think that although pre-modern people, pre-ideological ages had politics, they thought of their politics as sort of grafted into the cosmos and sort of spooky in a way that we don't accept. A silly version of this would be sort of the lampooning you get in Monty Python, might be a little dated, but of the woman passing out swords, and a lake isn't the basis for a system of government. It's a kind of lampoon of the Arthurian legend of, a lady in the lake handing out a sword. But, the seriousness behind the joke is sort of that there was a time of sort of naivete in a certain sense about politics that you see this in a really profound way in the plays of Shakespeare. I mentioned this in the book that, if the king is going to be killed, then there are earthquakes and all the cosmos reacts in some way. And an age of ideologies is one in which we are all aware that we're mobilizing our ideological maps with an imminent historical time. Doesn't mean that some of us might not think that God is involved or that there are supernatural dimensions. It just means that we know it's on us to mobilize. And in that sense, I think we all have the sort of pattern of politics typical of the French Revolution, where we theorize ideas and then we mobilize and make a bid on our agenda or program as the best sort of fit for society. So for those who are really into philosophy, I'll just put on aside here that I assume Charles Taylor's immanent frame as part of an age of ideologies. And by immanent frame, he means Newtonian space-time, that we're aware that even if those who believe in God, those who don't believe in God, we're aware that ideologies are something we're doing in historical time. And it's not going to be done for us by earthquakes and signs and wonders that, restore the social order.
Yeah, something that I see in modernity is definitely this disconnect of the spiritualism that might have been attached to habits in the past. Is it the connection to spirit or this larger understanding connection to nature, and the divine interacting with these ideas? Is that what makes it not an ideology, or would those things still just be ideologies? There were just fewer of them in the past.
It's more that, so yeah, I want to be really clear here, because what I'm not saying is that everyone now, holds their ideology as if they were atheists. That's not the case at all. In fact, I sort of have the reverse view at bottom, which is that all ideologies have this incredibly powerful, spiritual, almost religious dimension to them that has to do with what I call their ethical magnetism. So all the ideological traditions have this tremendously powerful pull on us, which is why people are willing to die for them. I even think I could say polemically that people across the board know what it means to die for their ideology, but they don't really know what it means to be a martyr for their church or religion, in part because their church or religion is aligned so much with their ideology that there's no breathing space between it. But I need to be clear that, so yeah, some people have ideologies in a kind of secular atheist way. You think of the left, Jacobins, Marxists, etc. But what I'm saying about people on the right is that it's not what their beliefs are. They might believe that God wants them to have a certain social order. It's the how they go about it. They go about it in a style that's typical of modernity. That is, you disseminate a pamphlet, you try to mobilize people, you try to gather people, even if it's around tradition or religion. The style of politics is different than the naivete of, well, the lady in the lake, to take the joke, is just going to do it for us, or the earthquakes, or the blood dim tide is just going to rise and do everything for us. So it's the how, it's not the what or the content. And if I can just say one more thing, if anything, just to push, my ultimate view is that the religious dimension of ideologies is always there. Even when you're an atheist, part of what ideologies are is not just science or just theory. This is kind of running criticism of the radical enlightenment in the book. They are in fact ethical calls to sort of a way of life, and that people convert into ideologies the way they would convert into a religion, or convert out of them, or lose faith in them, or get kind of cool to them and pose in the doorway the way you might with religion. You're not totally inside, but you're not leaving either. And I think that people do the same with ideologies.
Was something that resonated with me is for you to outline that the ideologies presuppose themselves. And I'm curious, is part of what makes an ideology, obviously there's it's a more action-oriented disposition, but does it need to convince other people? Does it need to gather followers in order to be an ideology?
Yeah, so it might be helpful for listeners to know that I'm working out of, big philosophical words here, phenomenological and hermeneutical traditions. But a simpler, more direct point is that I do see myself in a long tradition of Aristotle. I think Aristotle was wrong about something. He's not right about absolutely everything, but I think he was right about certain fundamental insights about politics. And that might not be immediately apparent if you pick up my book on ideologies. But Aristotle has the view that we're a political animal, and that our highest form of social organization is the polis, and that the polis encapsulates, either knowingly or unknowingly, some vision of what's good. And so the reason, to your question, what are ideologies doing? Do they have to recruit people? Are they action-based? Ultimately, what ideologies are is they're a vision of a good society, a good order, and they're rival visions of good societies or good orders. Everything from the many varieties, because there are many varieties of all the ideologies, the many varieties of feminism, the many varieties of liberalism, ecologism, conservatism, nationalism, fascism, socialism. They're all different bids on a vision of the good life. And since we live associationally, and that's inescapable for us, since we're dependent animals, and since we don't just do what our instincts tell us to, the life of a dog is always the life of a dog, or the life of a bear is always the life of a bear, because we're cultural animals, that's the hermeneutic part, we're always living within some tacit vision of a good life. Might not always be articulate about it. We might have just inherited. We might find ourselves in a social group that's just living it, but it's always there in the background. And so we're inescapably political across all ages. We live in an ideological age because we mobilize and try to theorize, an age that sort of apes the natural sciences, and that we try to theory build our visions and mobilize around them, right? To sort of give the most rational or, defensible account of the vision of the good life. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think it's not optional. It's not optional to be a political animal. There I agree with Aristotle. And then in our own age, it's impossible to escape ideology. And that's a big thing in the book, is I don't use ideology as just a negative term. Ideologies can be bad, but they're with us for better or worse. It's an ideological age. And anyone who tries to live without ideology is just actually sort of living an ideology out unreflexively through their practices, through conformity to what's going on around them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I appreciated how you denoted that not being in an ideology is not bad. And the way that you outline it here, as well as in your book, I think is comforting when you to some of the hard pills to swallow. When I first read it, I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to get followed up with. And taking the time to understand that position is it very beneficial. In your book, you talk a little bit about this, and it's pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of us, that what we believe is often really tied to our sense of self, and detaching from our sense of self to go explore different ideologies, to what you argue is to take more time to understand other ideologies, so it's not so assumptive, not so tacit. There's more communication and involvement, but doing so is essentially a threat to a sense of self in a lot of cases. Is this something that we have to risk in order to explore these different maps? And how does one brave that?
Yeah. Yeah. In the book, I talk about how I love this part in Homer, where, Odysseus is passing the sirens call. Everyone knows that. And he says, he's so curious about the sirens. He knows they're dangerous. He knows they'll sink the ship, but he says, tie me to the mast, and the rest of you put wax in your ears. And I say, that's what it's like if you're going to actually explore ideologies, because I think that we're much more reachable than we like to tell ourselves as humans to other people's visions of what's good. And part of the reasons that we're so fragile and defensive and don't want to listen to other people and want to sort of dismiss them before they even arrive, their ideological tradition, is actually because all ideologies have a kind of recruitment or appeal to them. And so it's easier to not have to listen to than actually have to listen to what I call this ethically magnetic dimension. I have a kind of theory of ideologies, and that's kind of coming out in little pieces here. But so one feature of ideologies is, they're in a secular age, they're disenchanted. Another feature is they have an ethically magnetic component. They make some bid on a vision of a good life. They can shape your identity. So, you're right. There is a kind of threat, possibly, to listening to someone else's ideology, or temptation, if you like, or risk involved. But there's also a risk. What I would say back to that in part is there's also a risk to not listening to other people's ideologies, right? Because then the way in which you hold your ideologies without a certain amount of self-knowledge about what motivates other people in your society, or possibly even motivates aspects of your own ideology. Take a concrete example, like liberalism is under a lot of heat right now, right? Even what it means. We live in a world that is largely shaped by the artifacts and practices of the ideology of liberalism. So if I don't listen to liberals talk about what liberal ideology is, I might not even understand some of my own practices entirely, some of the things I do, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I ultimately think liberalism is inadequate or I want to move beyond it, if I don't listen, I might lack self-knowledge. I might lack knowledge of other people around me. So there's a danger. Yes, there's a risk in losing yourself, in converting out of ideology, something that doesn't happen a lot with polarization, but it is a possibility for us. But there's also, I think there's a greater risk right now in people not being like the story I opened with, where they just walk up to each other and speak their ideological language at one another, as though the other one should understand, right? And they don't. And so we don't have a society anymore because people don't have any common understanding or common language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something I really appreciated is you went through so many of these ideologies on the right, on the left, in the middle, anywhere, and you give a really fair assessment of both the attractive, what you call the ethical magnetism, as well as some of the pain points or critiques of them. And I just enjoyed having that space to assess some of these things, and even to see how many of what can sometimes be classified as a single ideology, how many branches of ideologies under that there were. And so you mentioned this in the book, that there's mixing, and you can have Tex-Mex food, which means you can also have like conservative feminism or whatever. And
Yeah.
and I, rationally or philosophically, whatever, there might be some critiques to these different mixing, but I find the creative element to be really invigorating. It's invigorating because it asks the individual to make a little bit more of their own story than just living a story that's been prescribed to them. But it's also all of these different ones running around. It's incredibly disorienting. And that's part of being lost in the ideologies, is there's nowhere to go, or it feels as though, and there's so many choices and there's just choice fatigue all over the place. After, taking the time to slow down, trying not to be so assumptive in conversations, understanding your own position and others, and tying yourself to the mast and risking the conversion potentially, what is an individual's responsibility to like choose one? Do they have to choose one? Do they make their own? What is the end goal of being more aware of the ideologies surrounding them?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it is. I used the central, one of the central metaphors of the book is being lost in ideology, and it's an age in which people are sort of reeling. And there are many ways in which we're lost in ideology, but one of the ways is precisely that it's a time of great innovation and tumult. New fusions are happening, new hybridizations are happening on both the left and the right, and so that it's very hard to get one's bearings, because it's a time of sort of political change. And it's not just that the options are staying the same, it's that they're actually changing, they're mutating around new problems and new mixtures that people are coming up with politically. Now, what's the goal of it? Well, I don't believe in an approach to the study of politics that's completely ethically neutral. I don't think that's possible. And my background commitments in this book are humanism. But when I say humanism, people get sort of confused. I've already had some dialogues with different seminars on the book and things when people say, well, humanism is an ideology. Well, it's an ontological commitment foremost, meaning when I say the book is humanistic, I mean that humanism is the doctrine that humans are in some way unique in the order of things, that to understand or explain humans, you can't explain them the same way that you explain sort of inert matter in physics or something like this. So the humanism means understanding what's unique about interpreting and engaging human beings, right? And grasping them. And there's a long tradition of humanism in the West. It goes back a long ways. I think of people like Erasmus and Thomas More, probably goes back even further than that. But, humanists have often hoped for, in rival religious traditions, more humanistic treatments of theology. And even if I'm not a Muslim, I might hope for a more humanistic imam or a more humanistic rabbi. And similarly, I sort of hope for more humanistic politics to emerge across the ideologies, which is something I say by the end of the book. So, I prefer Michael Oakeshott as a conservative thinker to Burke. I prefer T.H. Green as a social liberal than I do to, say, Thomas Paine or John Rawls or someone like this. I prefer William Morris to Karl Marx. Because on the side of what I don't prefer is kind of technocratic scientific view of ideology, that ideology is just a science. It's not a tradition of meaning. It's not an ethical call. It's not a culture, right? And I think one of the ways that we're really lost in ideology is, take kind of a caricature, but like the really orthodox Marxist view that Marxism is just a science and everything else is ideology. I'm completely against this idea that you could have a politics that's just science, because our politics always extends beyond science to questions of significance or meaning that are specific to human life, that don't come up for animals, they don't come up for physics particles or something like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think touching into that, humanism is making the differential that we tell stories and we're meaning making beings is really interesting. And I know you largely pull from McIntyre, which I really appreciate and was familiar to me. And part of your assessment, as well as some of McIntyre's work, is looking at different times in their context and saying, well, within this context, these set of virtues are more important, or within this ideology, these sets of values are the ones that we're going to choose to predicate our lives on. Can you tell me the difference between ideologies having different social contexts
Mm-hmm.
versus a pure subjectivism of just saying, oh, well, this is the time or this is the idea. It's just subjective. Like, can you give us a little bit more of a discrete understanding of those two separate things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the ways we're lost in ideology is that we keep assuming, a lot of us within our various ideological traditions, that our politics is just obvious. It's like science or data. And so you're asking the subjectivist question. Part of the problem is people think of their ideologies as just immediately and obviously certain, natural. So in the book, I say this is mistaking the map for the territory, the ideological map for the territory. It's mistaking cartography for geography. And so if we don't have a way of proving ideologies that's just the data or just the science, not because data is unimportant, but because it's a bid on meaning or a vision of a good life, of what's significant politically, that always goes beyond just facts to what ought to be the case. So the maps make a world that extends beyond just the facts, right? Mm-hmm. Then the problem becomes, well, how are you objective about something that you're not just going to be able to empirically prove to be the case? Because you can stack up all the facts in the world and a vision of the good still extends beyond it. And we can always ask ourselves as humans, okay, but what kind of social world do we want to have, or ought we to desire to have, right? Not just what desires do I have right now, but what desires do I have about my desires? That's a very human predicament. That's a very Augustinian predicament. What are my desires about my desires? So then we're in this strange space, then you have the specter of subjectivism. Okay, so what do we do if political life is centrally about meaning questions? And this is where, on the other side, you could almost set up someone like Nietzsche. I don't know if it's entirely fair to Nietzsche, but you could set up a kind of voluntarist subjectivism where it's, okay, if this house believes in science, which I'm very hard on, doesn't settle ideology for us, like you can make the major ideologies compatible with the sciences, then what are you left with? Is just leaping into the void of different meanings? And my view is no, that this is a very modern problem. And I do get this from McIntyre and from people like Charles Taylor, that modern people ping pong back and forth between a standard of objectivity that's not available to them in ethics and political philosophy, to an extreme subjectivism. And they're actual twins. They're kind of dual partners, because when modern people become disappointed with the fact that they can't prove their ideology or their ethics the way they would the second law of Newtonian physics, force equals mass times acceleration, then what they sometimes do with that disappointment, sometimes they double down and just keep saying force equals mass times acceleration, force equals mass, women have rights, or, the unborn have rights, and they just double down on, it's obvious, why don't you see it? But sometimes what they do is they ping pong into this other worry that you have, which is, well, does that make everything subjective? And, I want you to get in here, but like the zone that I'm concerned with is, how do you be objective about meaning questions? How do you gain objectivity in a way that's not just you say the data is obvious, but you also don't just say it's purely subjective?
I'm curious. As I was reading this, a question came up for me, which was, is this total disorientation around all these different cultural mindsets and ideologies in part to an underlying cultural belief that we need to have beliefs? Is it a type of mindset that has been cultivated over time that we need to have, that it's not so obvious to us? Like, why isn't it obvious to us? Why do we have to spend so much time fighting about what our vision of the good life is? I'm curious what you would say to that.
Yeah, I think it's because modern people have a very specific way of being superstitious or deluded. which is that we take our meanings and we turn them into mere common sense or mere data, like I was saying, or mere rationalism, almost like a truth of logic, like all triangles have three sides. And so that, we're all aware, oh yes, in past ages, people were superstitious. They thought that, like that when they threw a ball, maybe like, different spirits were pushing it or something. They didn't know Newtonian physics. And aren't we so much more advanced because we're not superstitious? That's not my view at all. I think modern people are superstitious in a very particular way, which you could call scientism. And we take our ideologies and we try to turn them into what they're not, which is science. Instead of seeing them as cultural traditions, closer to like religions, they're different from religions, but they're similar to them. Instead of saying, look, these are cultural traditions, that doesn't make them relativistic. It doesn't mean they don't have truth claims. It just means that the way we access them and the way we interact with them as phenomenon is as webs of meaning, traditions of meaning. We try to do a shortcut and we try to sort of say, look, I've got a rational syllogism that just proves it to you. It's like logic. Or I've got a mere data that will prove it to you, right? And so one way we get lost is we assume that it's just obvious and you must have completely departed from reality if you could possibly have that politics, right? We don't see a rival claim to a vision of good. Instead, what we see is that person doesn't understand logic, or they don't understand data, or they don't understand reality itself. They're completely crazy. Not only are they crazy, they're bad. They're crazy and they're bad. And that's what's happening to our society right now. Is it's not just that the other side is crazy and can't think straight. It's they're also really, really bad because they can't think straight, they're going to tear the whole thing apart. Whereas my side's obvious. It's common sense, right? Like, I mean, I think an example would be helpful here. I don't know if you would like an example. Well, like the gender example, to be honest with you, because it's one that people are very upset. And I actually try to steer clear because people are so angry, you almost can't say anything. But at the risk of upsetting, if you take the gender question, right, that's a very clear one where opposite political ideological traditions think that their view is just obvious. It's just science. So like to very briefly take a sketch of the view amongst progressives. Amongst progressives, it's just obvious that sexuality is nonconformist. And that if you try to sort of make a conformity out of it, right, if you try to sort of police it, you're doing some kind of surveillance on people and you're going to give them hangups and suppress a healthy sexuality, right? On the right, it's obvious that gender comes, they're males, they're females. You see it in other species, that you need it for the reproduction of the species. You need it for a healthy society, for healthy relations, and everything from marriage to sport. Take the Olympics example that just exploded recently, right? With the boxing and everything. So it's obvious that they're just males and females, right? But I think if you take my approach to ideology, what we can see here is the mere facts aren't doing enough work for us. You can already see colored an interpretation or take on meaning that we need to have a better debate over. Because already in the view that gender is just nonconformity is already a vision of what ought to be a good, healthy sexuality, which is a nonconformist, pluralistic one. And already in a vision that nature just comes in two types is a bid on a vision of what's good, which is a complementarity between male and female and, a certain kind of a family, etc. So people's ethical visions are coloring their view of nature. Fair enough, but what's not a fruitful dialogue is to just say, look at the facts. Look, I can show you the facts, right? What we need to have a debate over is meaning. And I also think we would get a lot further on if we just didn't appeal to scientific authority, either on the left or the right. I mean, if science just settled it for us, we wouldn't be having the political debate. No one's debating gravity right now, right? No one's debating that I need oxygen. The reason it's so tense around gender is precisely because you can't socialize and acculturate people to the different traditions. And so to scream about nature at each other is not getting us off on the right foot, in my opinion. There might be a place to discuss nature within the wider debate, but let's see that we're working within cultural traditions here and interpretations.
Yeah, no, I think that's important to note, is having the conversation about what's important or what is good, and I really think that's so much of why being lost in ideology is such a terrifying place, and it, I think, really restricts our ability to learn because that fear is so often holding us back from questions that we don't even know that we have. We just don't want to voice them in the event that we trigger the the oppressive forces of whatever ideology we're living in. And so I really appreciate that. Now, I was doing some research, and I saw that you had a interview with the Hank Center this summer. And you stated in this interview, and I'll link it for our listeners to go and look at that. And correct me if I want to represent you correctly here, but you said that certain types of religious involvement across the world religions can be an act of taking a step out of ideology, which sounds attractive in a world where we're lost. And you don't say that we take a full step. There's one foot in and one foot out, but maybe one foot out is better than both feet in. Can you tell me a bit more about why that is? Like, why do the world religions kind of get this ticket out of the world of ideology?
In part because they're a lot older than ideologies are. They've been around a lot longer. And so take the tradition I work out of. I'm a Catholic, so I am more comfortable speaking out of Catholicism, but I think you could say similar things about various forms of Protestantism. And I think you could certainly say it about Buddhism, Islam, and Judaism in a different way, maybe. But Catholicism has been around through many, many types of epochs and different kinds of situations socially and politically that are much older than, say, liberalism, conservatism, nationalism, socialism. And also in Catholicism, there's this idea that the good is in some kind of a tension with the world. It's a complex tension, as all Catholics know. We're not supposed to reject the world. God made the world is good. And yet, if you just stop at the world, that's not yet the greatest good, which is God. Right. So you've got this kind of creative tension between, what Christ calls the kingdom of God and any earthly kingdom. Here I'm very influenced by Augustine, that the city of man is never the same as the city of God. And you can see that in the book. I don't say it out loud, but I sort of treat the ideologies as cities of men, the way Augustine does in the City of God, where there might be good things about Rome. In fact, I had to really dig and become a more subtle reader of Augustine because I used to just see him, torching Rome and saying how bad it is, but he actually says there's some good things about it if you pay a little more attention. And I think that that's what it's like to be an ideological age. Is you're passing through the various cities of man and the various bids on visions of what's good, and yet as a Christian anyway, that there's some mystery that transcends any one human social order, and that the human social order is finite. And that our efforts at coming up with a vision of good ideology are finite. Maybe even a quicker way to put this is Jesus did not come with a plot. Jesus could have arrived presumably on Christianity's own understanding. Jesus could have arrived with just here's liberalism, here's socialism, here's conservatism. That's not what Jesus did. Instead, it's all, paradoxes and his way and his, it's a very, I think people think Jesus is much clearer than he is. He tries to shock us out of our comfort with our different idols, with the different things our heart is attached to. And so I think there's this gap. Now, it can be hard to see because, as I say in the book, religions can be totally swallowed up by a given ideological tradition. So there's no Augustinian breathing room anymore between the church. And I think I'd like to think this is less a risk for Catholics, precisely. It's not always, but I'd like to think it is less so because of the way it's set up, where there's a voice from outside your own polity, the Pope, the bishops, that are never quite a fit. But Catholics can also get captured entirely by an ideological program. I also, maybe not entirely charitably, sort of think it's a greater risk for, say, evangelicals who have no ecclesiology that goes beyond the city of man to just think, well, whatever the United States does is what Jesus wanted, right? Or at least whatever the Republicans wanted is what Jesus wanted, right? Yeah. And so it's a strange time because religion can also be swallowed up by an ideological tradition so that you can't really see the difference anymore. And by the way, this can happen on the left too, insofar as people are still religious on the left. You can have people just think, well, Jesus just wanted you to be a liberal and to be tolerant, right? Which also doesn't really fit well with an actual historical account of Christianity.
Yeah, and it's also still assuming it's taking the religious moment in time and turning it into a how and an action, which is earlier to our conversation above. And I want to go back a little bit more to this identity piece, in that it's enormously comforting to have a home base. whether that's you choose an ideology because that's what your family had, or because you went through a religious experience to explore that for yourself, or you choose the one that happens to give you the most political power. um, and it's dangerous out there,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
look at the other ones. I mean, I've gone to mass. It was so comforting to have the meditation of routine. And I've found that in many other places as well. Honestly, like making bread. I used to make a lot of bread. And every
Mhm.
morning it was a routine, and I get up, and it was a similar comfort of safety and security. But in your view, what is the balance of safety and insecurity as you move out? How do we stay like grounded? How do we stay grounded in this journey and experience?
In part by allowing oneself to encounter other people, I would say, and so for those people who read my book and are Christians, they'll see that, okay, Jason obviously has a kind of Christian outlook, but I don't mean it to be exclusive to Christians, which is why I don't just put it out there as a blocker. I think that if you can sign on to humanistic commitments that I was discussing earlier, um, part of where we get our bearings is through sort of trying to find what the shared human situation is existentially. And the shared human situation existentially is that we're a meaning making animal that is inescapably political and inescapably lives out some answer to what the good life is. Even if we don't articulate it, even if we don't um, get into actual dialogues about it, our life will be an answer to the question, or various starts and stops answers to the question, what is a good life, good human life? And that's a kind of basis for humanism that I would hope atheists, people from other religious traditions, can also see as a shared space of kind of questioning and understanding, which is, okay, we all have this meaning making predicament. We're all in this sort of problem of the age of ideologies together. And moreover, we have sources of meaning. Religion is one of them. I just went on about that one for a while, but for listeners who that doesn't resonate as much with, we have other sources of meaning I wish people would tap into again at the more local level, like friendships, or I mean, they can even seem a little bit, some of them can seem trite, but like maybe you really like a sport, or you really like you said, bread making. And it might be the person who really makes bread well has that damn politics you don't understand. But as long as you're making bread, you're good. You're wonderful. And I actually think it would be the beginning of a kind of social healing or the reconstitution of social friendship in the United States if people could find these other sources that are lower to the ground and haven't quite been picked up. Now, what's really hard about our society right now is it's so ideologized and so on the brink of sort of violence. Well, violence is already happening around us, that people have even made things like bread making into markers. So it's like, yeah, but how are you making that bread? Is that vegan, or is that, so it can be hard
Is it
to.
non-GMO? Does the flour come from France? I had this situation where my whole family suffers from celiac disease, and somehow they can eat flour from Europe. Okay. And that's great. I went into this hoity toity bakery in Boulder and I asked for flour from France so I could make my family bread. And they were like, we don't carry anything that hasn't been grown within a 50-mile radius. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And I think that, so, I mean, if I can go back to one of the original metaphors of the book, which is that ideologies are maps and they both orient us, but they can disorient us when we mistake them as mere geography out there, right? We mistake the map for the territory. And I think one thing that's happening that is very troubling is that the maps are so intensely polarized right now that they're picking up more and more into them, right? So that everything is becoming a marker of your ideological world or bubble. Are you in or out, right? And so, and that's kind of going all the way down, if you like. I never think it goes all the way down, because I think humans existentially and spontaneously, here again, Aristotle's looming in the background, have forms of association or what's good between them that confound or are more like primitive or primordial than politics. Politics is inescapable, but they might imagine you're suddenly, like in a plane crash and you end up in the mountains with someone, and they're a Republican and you're a Democrat, or they're a Democrat and you're a Republican, but you need to survive. Something more human will happen at that point. Or you're so lonely and you're in a jail cell and you're both lifers, but damn, you need someone to talk to. So my point is that even though it can be hard in ideological age to reconnect in that way, Religion can be a source of that. You can, you're Buddhist, you can meditate with the other people. You're Catholic, you can take the Eucharist together and go to the liturgy. You're Protestant, you can sing a hymn together. All those things can be also pulled up into ideology, but there are also other sources that are kind of more ordinary and folksy that we need to go back to form sort of social friendship again, in my opinion. And so part of the book, I do say by the end of it, I hope that people fall a little less in love with their own ideology and a little more with someone else's, that they understand someone else's more. And you could think, wow, that's Jason's Christian, love your neighbor thing. Yes, it is. But it's also just a humanistic existential plea to see that the human animal across from you is not so different from you. Their predicament is not so different, even if they put their money down somewhere else in terms of what they think a good life is.
Yeah, well, and I think maybe this is my own ideology speaking, but even living in active conflict with people who you might have to interact with consistently hurts. It sucks. It is really difficult versus having a deeper appreciation, and some might call it respect, but a perspective to see the divinity in that individual, to adopt something that is potentially wildly different from your own, but there's something connecting you. And it's interesting, the things that I heard you name as potentially more healing, these folksy activities lower to the ground, closer to everyday life. They are activity based, but they're not activity based in the way that ideologies are trying to pull activity. And I think that's an interesting distinction, because human action is a really powerful tool, and it seems like it's being put in two different places in this scenario. Okay, I have this question about time, and let me know if this doesn't make sense, but you specifically compare how different ideologies understand time. And for example, in the conservative realm, time might be linear, but with an emphasis on previous expression of morality, versus a progressive understanding of time where it's still linear, but the moral expression is the emphasis of moral expression is put at the forefront as we take steps forwards. How do you see time above all these different timelines, above these all different meaning making of time, when we're kind of wading through the ideological soup?
Wonderful question. Yeah, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question before. And you're right to perceive that these world making maps that are ideologies are so powerful that they even can shape our notion of temporality. And there again, I see an underlying sort of spiritual or religious dimension of the human experience of ideology, because temporality itself is sort of imbued with a kind of significance, the way it arrives. I love T.S. Eliot, and The Wasteland, I think is quite expressive. You can enjoy it as a non-conservative, but Eliot was a conservative, and you can see the sort of conservative view of time as it's very hard to create and accumulate good things, and they can disappear very quickly. I think in the book I say it can be like lichen. I know we're both from Colorado, where you're walking through the tundra. You can kill little microplants that took decades to grow very fast. Whereas in the progressive view, there's a kind of looking forward to time as a possibility of future embetterment, of a better time, of something that could be arriving that's better than anything that's happened so far in the past. And those are very different orientations. I would say that my commitments, from phenomenology and hermeneutics and humanism, is that time is, for one thing, epochal. I mean, that's certainly in structuring the background of the book, that we live in an age of ideologies and we don't really know when it's going to end. And so we're meaning-making, world-making creatures. And so that means we live in different epochs. But we do this all together in a way that I don't actually think social theorists have a wonderful understanding of. It obviously has taken up the imagination of some, incredible minds like Hegel and whatnot. But, why do we dwell in these epochs that then seemingly go away? They go away technologically. You go from an agrarian society to, industrial one, but they also go away culturally in these ways that we've been talking about. So part of it is that we live in an epochal sense of time. I think also that tacit in my conception of time is that time is somewhat opaque to us. And I do think one of the messages of the book is a certain epistemic humility around politics, that we're all making a bid on something that we don't know the way we know that F equals MA. We're making bids on something that, although we might be willing to sacrifice even our lives for it, we're taking a risk. There's a faith dimension. There's a faith in the vision or resonance with the vision and so I think there's a certain opacity to time in the book, that we don't know when the epoch will change or how it will change. I say in the book that if it were the end of an age of ideologies, we'd already, in some sense, see what's next, if there is a next. Because instead, what you have, every time someone says it's the end of ideology, be it Karl Marx or Francis Fukuyama, they just reproduce their own ideology naively. What they're really just saying is everyone's going to be a liberal from now on, or a Marxist from now on, or all utopian programs have collapsed, so everyone's a conservative from now on. But that's just saying your ideology is going out into infinity, which is just to still say it's an ideological age, but you expect hegemony or dominance. But what I don't see is, I don't see what time brings next to humanity. I don't see what the next epoch is. I have no idea. It's opaque to me. I know that there have been other kinds of epochs in the past that we can't seem to get back to because we can't get back to that naivete. So surely there can be another kind of epoch, but I don't know what the next stage is.
Yeah. For me, it reminded me of some Levin that I read in college, of this circular understanding of time and experience. And also it called up, this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, was really popular like 2 years ago. And it was a natural scientist who also had Native American heritage. And she was writing about both the indigenous knowledge that had been passed down to her about things that are actively being discovered in scientific studies. And this, for me, both your reflections and these other readings that I had encountered started to help give me that appreciation for other quote unquote ideologies or other times that aren't this present moment, but do have their really valid benefits or hopes or ethical magnetism, as much as they're also limited. All right, I want to start wrapping up because we got to get you out for your brand new baby. Congratulations. But you're a thinker, you're a writer, you're also a professor. So you're in the classroom with students. Are, I presume, mostly undergraduate, also some graduate?
Yes, mostly undergraduate at Seaver College at Pepperdine, in California. Yeah, I have a master's class that I've taught on occasion as well, but yes, mostly undergraduates.
So your undergraduate students are, I mean, we're only getting older, so they're younger and they're younger, and at this point, they're coming up in the age where the ideological world is only speeding up. There's only more of them. There's only more mixes and matches to make. How do you see them adapting to this world in a different way? Do you see them rising to the challenge? What is their response to this being their current state of affairs without a comparison tool of maybe a little bit before? Even within the last 10 years, it's sped up so much. Do you see them coming to this challenge with different tools or different perspectives?
Very much so. I mean, so I taught this class on political ideologies for, it will be now the 11th year here at Pepperdine. And the undergraduates, as you say, they stay perennially young because their crop keeps changing, but they are always pointing things out to me that I'm missing. And as you mentioned, a big thing in my theory of ideology is that they're liquid and they easily hybridize. And I think that young people, because they're new in the world, are sometimes more adept at seeing the new combinations or hearing the new combinations than older people are, who put them into existing patterns or expect things to recur. And so, for instance, I had this brilliant student 4 or 5 years ago, and he went on to Harvard Law and things, but he told me, do you know who Adrian Vermeule is and Catholic integralism? And at the time I had no idea, and since then I've been in, public debates and writing about that. But it was a student of mine who said, there's this new ideological configuration. Do you know anything about it? No, I don't. I have no idea about it. And similarly, like, earlier iterations of the syllabus, I didn't quite have the what it's like or first person experience of nationalism nailed down. And a student on the right said, you don't really have the voice of nationalism in here in quite the right way. And so I changed up the syllabus. I had a student on the left one time tell me, in an earlier version, I was calling white supremacy racialism. And she said to me, I still remember, she's like, why don't you just call it white supremacy? Are you like afraid to call it that? Why, what exactly is racialism? You're almost acting like everyone can be equally racist, whereas the history is that, there's this established racial caste. And say, okay, fair enough. I correct. That's not an adequate grasp of a tradition that is alive and sort of on the ground. So I'm always learning from them. In terms of the crisis that we face, I don't know. I mean, I don't have that sort of reflexive, the young will always save us. I also see them as they're racked by anxiety. And I think the new technologies have a lot to do with the hybridization and liquidity of ideology we're living with. Things might stabilize and slow again, by the way, but there are many things that are possible in time, talking about the opacity of time. But right now they're going very rapidly, in part because people through new media are combining beliefs in different ways that weren't expected before, right? Post-liberalism, eco-fascism, ecofeminism, there's so many new kinds of ideology out there. And I see a lot of anxiety. And, one last point I might make is that my students really struggle to find that space that we were talking about earlier that feels like it's pre-ideological, or at least confounds our ideology, where there's a kind of social friendship that's possible. I think that was more possible in my generation. And I think we're all swimming in the same waters. It's becoming harder for all of us. But I feel sometimes a little sad for my students that they've never had the experience of friendship, that they didn't really know what the person's ideology was before, because everyone arrives with so many markers already that they read and say, you belong to that tradition. And that's sad to me. I wish more people would fall in love. I love Shakespeare. Obviously, I've mentioned him several times, but like Romeo and Juliet, I wish more people would fall in love with Montagues and Capulets, which today would be, if you're on the left, fall in love with someone on the right, and if you're on the right, fall in love with someone on the left. That would be good for our society.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible for them, because there's such a crisis of social friendship and belonging right now, to picture that.
Yeah. But I'm curious, what are some of the writers or thinkers or podcasts, any resources that you might recommend for people who maybe they're not in the academic world, maybe they're not studying for their PhD, but they do care about living in their life and finding community and thinking about these things? Who might you recommend for us to take a further look into?
Well, certainly, someone you mentioned before, Alistair McIntyre, who I know is also important for you, was very important for me, is important for me intellectually, and his book, both After Virtue, which really kind of explodes the idea that you could have a traditionless politics, which is obviously something that's in the background of my book as well. That you could have a politics that's just the universal politics that doesn't come out of a particular tradition. But also his book, Dependent Rational Animals, which is a sort of account of a defense of Aristotle and the idea of associational belonging. Someone else who I think is probably the greatest living philosopher in the English-speaking world right now is Charles Taylor. And I'm always advocating for his work. His book, A Secular Age, when I read it, I was an atheist, and it just absolutely exploded my mind. I was convinced you couldn't be an intellectually honest theist. And, that book completely turned around my way of thinking. So anything Charles Taylor writes, and he's written so much, is good. If I can put in one more, is I've been reading Jon Fosse, who is no secret. He was the Norwegian writer who won the Nobel Prize recently, but his book Septology is a very human book in just the way that I was referring to before. It's a doppelganger story in which two people are practically the same person, but they're different. One's an atheist and one's a theist, but they're friends, and they keep checking in on each other across the course of the book, and they're leading kind of parallel lives, and it's just a brilliant book. So I would look at those as sort of humanists. I'm always pointing people to Dorothy Day and people like that, but those kind of more human voices that are looking for a kind of common ground or a confounding space where everyone is instead kind of polarizing and screaming war. Yeah.
Thank you. I will certainly be looking at some of those myself, and I'll link them all below or in the comments. But okay, last question with our last few seconds. I mean, you throw some punches at people for sure. Like if I'm in any of these ideologies, and yeah, you give them good credence. Like you really show the positives, but then you also throw some punches. And so I can imagine you have a number of critics, but I'm curious, what has been the response to your book, and what are some of the criticisms that you've received about not just that you're digging on ideologies, but about the overall position of this position of taking a step back from the ideologies and looking at a map of the maps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that I don't have the view that you can have a neutral science of politics, as I was saying earlier. So yes, my view of ideology, while not treating ideologies as just false beliefs, which I think is a mistake, it also remains critical. So I don't pretend to be value neutral. And I generate criticism through the ontological commitment to humanism for the philosophers listening out there. So that's how I generate the criticism of the different ideologies. And I criticize all of them insofar as they violate the assumption that humans are self-interpreting, meaning-making animals. in terms of the response to that, there has been a very positive response in some quarters to this idea that we need a space for dialogue. On the other hand, I think that it's kind of a threatening message, as you said in the beginning. It's a difficult pill to swallow, and I've been a little surprised at how resistant different political groups that are very used to thinking of their politics as just rational or just science are to hearing the book. So I have to say that so far it has resonated, not exclusively, so this is an oversimplification, but conservatives have tended to be more open to the book, in part, I think, because they're used to having to explain, at least in credentialed elite institutions, explain their own politics to other people. Whereas I have to say that so far mainstream liberalism in the United States, and I say this as someone who identifies as, in a weird way, on the left, kind of left Catholic, but liberals in the left in the United States are so technocratic and so beholden to kind of rationalist scientism that the idea that their politics should be treated as a tradition is almost an anathema, I find. It's almost like, no, our politics is just obviously syllogistically true or just true because of the data. And so I've been a little bit surprised that some of the criticism, I would say, has come, or non-interest or dismissiveness, I would say, has come more from sort of the mainstream technocratic progressive liberalism that I find very exasperating myself, because it tends to sort of present itself as just common sense or just following the data or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're at time. You've got a life. We got to go. But this has been a really interesting conversation. I would love to talk for hours more. I'm like, are your classes online? Can I take them?
My tweets are online, unfortunately. My class is not yet. I do have a YouTube channel where I sometimes throw lectures up. It started during the pandemic, so if people want to check that out, I will sometimes post lectures that I recorded for my students. It's something that started during the pandemic, and then I just occasionally will throw one up there when I had to record it for a student. So
yeah. Awesome. But again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for such humane and intelligent questions. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in on today's episode of Madison's Notes. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and that it expanded your understanding and interest in the world of ideological understanding. So go make yourself some bread and then make friends with that bread. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, feel free to reach out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'm Laura Laurent, and this has been Madison's Notes.